All right, we are here with a girl named Ron. So, do you want to
Hello.
briefly introduce yourself, talk about where you are, what your content schedule is, what teams you're on, that kind of thing?
Sure, absolutely. I do too many things probably for my own good. I am super busy all the time, and that is no exception in Magic the Gathering. I am a girl named Ron, and you can find me and all of my links at linktree/ a girl named Ron. I am part of Top Deck Team, Updeck Studios, and I am a founding member of Birds of Paradise. And Birds of Paradise is a group of women and femme presenting folks, marginalized genders, and we play in convention spaces. All of us are content creators. We all play in convention spaces, games with people for charitable donations. And we were able to raise at one event that was only like a 2-day weekend event. We were able to raise something like $1,500 for Trans Lifeline. So we had a lot of fun doing it and we decided to make it official. And we're moving forward and doing that at future events as well. I will be at MagicCon Vegas in September, and I will also be with Top Deck Team at MTG Summit in Salt Lake City in October. I have an upcoming podcast that you can follow now. It is called More Than Magic. There's just a snippet, a little preview on up right now that you're able to go and find it and follow it at all places that you can find podcasts. It's available everywhere. And I am currently editing that, so it will release sometime in the late fall, early winter.
Wonderful. Yeah, I'm so glad to see that you're just so passionate about being involved in the community. And in fact, I actually, as we've talked about previously before this, I was actually recommended to talk to you by Kuro Hitsuki.
He is a lovely human. I love Kuro. We've become really good friends. I love working with him and talking to him. So yeah, I'm honored that I was his recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. He also a bastion in the community and also recently finished up with the Representation Matters event. So really
Mhm.
glad to be working with all these people who are standing up and being a voice for the community at large. And it's just really great to have these people on the podcast and getting their voice even more amplified out there.
Super important. I think for a long time, the game just had a lot of similar looking folks playing it, especially in its beginnings in the early 90s. It was just pretty much played by white boys and men, and that demographic has changed significantly over time, which is lovely to see. There's a lot more even in the last 2 years when I first started playing Magic, I'm the only woman usually who plays in my LGSs, at least in the beginning. Now there are a handful of us. So now when I go to the LGS, I see more women. And when I first started attending conventions, it was really almost hard to find women at Magic conventions. But now the representation has changed, not only women, but people of color as well. And it's lovely to see that demographic change and to see people not assigning some mysterious rule to who can play a game. The game's for everyone, and I'm glad to see that more people are encouraged to get into it, and it's not a deterrent that they are essentially the minority playing the game. It's being a woman or being a person of color in a space of 90% white men can be a deterrent to some people. So it's really exciting to see that some people are not afraid of that boundary and they're pushing past it, and more people are encouraged to take part in it. I really do think that this game is super wonderful and has so many valuable benefits, and I'm excited to see those demographics continue to change.
We're talking about the importance of playing other formats. And this podcast primarily talks about Commander and the gameplay philosophy of multiplayer. But it's
Mhm.
really important for players to actually get into other formats, not only for their own enjoyment, but also to give them some perspective on why things are the way they are, learning things like card advantage and things that are a little bit more nuanced in multiplayer. I think having that base expectation from 1v1 formats is really important. Can you talk about the 60 card formats you play currently, or that you have played, or that you're interested in playing?
So I don't play any of the formats in paper except for Pauper. I did make a Pauper deck in paper, but I play a lot of standard in Arena, and that's probably my preferred format alternate to EDH. And obviously limited and drafts and things like that, sealed. I love that. So that I do play in paper as well, but that's kind of a different circumstance. You're really, for lack of a better word, limited to what you have available to you from what you pull, but as opposed to constructing your own deck at home. But I do play a lot of those formats in Arena, and that was a recent change. I started playing EDH. I played EDH exclusively for the first year or year and a half that I played Magic. And I think what got me into other formats is going to events and seeing things like the Pro Tour and seeing the competitive events and realizing that none of those events were ever Commander. And I started wondering to myself, well, if Commander is the most popular format and Commander is all I see people playing, but the competitive environment doesn't ever really include Commander, it's always some other formats I'm not aware of, then what am I missing here? What is that thing? And that was kind of like OG Magic, right? Like Commander didn't exist when Magic started, and I felt like I was missing something. I needed to know more about these formats, and then I found out how many formats there are and all the different ways that the game can be played. And I like that it's so multifaceted and you can do so much with the same cards, and it doesn't rely on having a pod of 4 people or even having a pod of 2 people because you can play online. So once I started opening that door and discovering different formats, it changed a lot for me because I not only became more knowledgeable as a player and got a completely different sense of strategy that I didn't have before, but I also had all these other means of playing the game and people to play it with. It really changed a lot in a positive way for me to discover other formats.
That's really interesting to hear. I also think it's really interesting that one of the paper components you played was Pauper, because I feel like that's a really accessible way to play another format that's not too different from other 60 card formats like Modern and Standard. And especially the fact that you could theoretically go to your local game store and just make the deck because it's so affordable. Do you have any thoughts on whether there should be more support for Popper in paper? I don't think there's a whole lot. I don't think it's ever been a well, we had Poppergeddon not that long ago, so I guess I shouldn't say it's not a supported format necessarily, but it certainly seems to take a backseat to formats like Modern and Legacy, the more high power formats.
I agree, and I think that is exactly the reason. I think that because you're limited to commons only, the consensus or the general thought is that they're not going to be really strong cards. And sometimes that's true, but it takes a little bit more creativity to make a really strong or powerful or high performing competitive deck with cards that are just commons or bound by a price point. I think that also makes you a better player because a lot of people look at the common cards as chaff and just kind of toss them aside and don't assign them any value. And I think that's doing a disservice to yourself as a player because you're not familiarizing yourself with a bulk of cards. I don't know exactly the percentage of commons to rares or uncommons or whatever, but assuming 50% of the cards are common, you're limiting yourself to only 50% of the game by throwing these cards away. So playing a format like Pauper is really familiarizing yourself with more of the card pool, but also giving you the ability to play cards that maybe other people don't consider or discard in things like Commander. there are things I've discovered in Pauper that I'm like, oh, that would be really good for this deck. And I'll throw it in something, and people are like, wait, what does that do? And they don't expect it because it's a card that they thought was chaff and just aren't familiar with, you know? I love that if you are unfamiliar with other formats, Pauper, while not being super popular, is very affordable and has a lot of great pros to, advantages to playing it. It's because it's so affordable, it's a great way to kind of throw together a deck for potentially a dollar, essentially. Some of these cards are literally a penny. So you can throw together a deck and play this really inexpensive format as long as you have a couple people to play it with, or even just one other person. You can probably make multiple decks and say, "Hey, I have an extra deck. Do you want to play with me?" And get other people interested in it because it is so inexpensive. And it does make use of those cards that you might have just thrown away otherwise. People just have boxes and boxes of bulk, and you could just turn all of that bulk into pauper decks.
I'm super glad that you mentioned the viability of these cards, not only in Pauper, but also I think for the commander players who are watching this, I think that's a really good point is that a lot of these cards are good in Commander, and Commander has become more so, and I believe it'll continue being this way, is more so becoming a home for these forlorn cards. A lot of
Yeah.
very weird, interesting cards that just don't have the right home. Eventually, there will be a Commander for it. So even if Commander remains your favorite format, Pauper is definitely a way to get used to some of these, especially because Pauper is also a format that includes older cards. So there are some very powerful older cards as well. So you can definitely get your competitive fix there, but you also will find very unique cards that only work in these scenarios where you have this limited card pool, but will work very well in the singleton part of Commander as well.
And another cool thing about Pauper is that while the rule is that you can only use commons in your deck, there were several times where a card was reprinted and it was changed from common to an uncommon status. However, because there is a printing that exists making it common, it's still legal in Pauper. So even if it's current or most recent printing, has changed or is, uncommon or rare or whatever the case may be, if it has ever been common, it's legal in Pauper.
Right. And a lot of people would be surprised to learn that a lot of cards from the original, Alpha Beta Unlimited sets, a lot of those cards were very powerful, as we know from Commander and from
Mhm.
Legacy. And some of those cards were mistakenly printed as commons because they didn't understand the power level at the time. So Hopper can definitely be a fun, interesting format and can be quite competitive if you want it to be. But it's also a really affordable way to get into it. You also mentioned Arena, which I think is a really good thing. Even though I don't play a lot of standard, if I was going to play, a lot of it would be on Arena. I think having the option to play online, and especially post pandemic here, people really got used to the idea of playing online rather than necessarily in paper. And I think having that online aspect to it means that you can play Magic whenever you want, and just being able to do so for free, essentially. It is freemium, don't get me wrong, but for the most part, you can play these formats for free. You can play standard, you can play historic, you can play, I don't know why you would, but you could play the one where they change, all the the card effects. Blanking on the name right now, but maybe one day we'll have other formats on there. But for now, if you want to play Magic for free, I feel like Arena is just your best bet. Even if you could get into Pauper with your chef commons and uncommons, then I think Arena is probably your best bets. And if you want to, play other formats, you can also get into Magic Online, which was recently acquired by Daybreak Games, and that's also a really great way to play online if you're not doing webcam through Spell Table.
I have not played MTGO at all. I think I downloaded it once and then just never ended up playing it. I think for me, it's because I have never been a competitive gamer. And from what I know, all of my friends that are in competitive gaming play MTGO. And I think for me, that was a little bit of a deterrent. it just felt more serious, and it felt like the only people I knew that played it were people who play in tournaments and things like that. And that was not something that I am equipped to do. I wasn't before. I'm still not really. That's not a space that I have ever really entered. And I think playing on MTGO against people that just are there for a competitive mindset would make the experience less enjoyable for me because I'm not prepared for it. But MTGA Arena is really super user friendly and appropriate for all ages. It's got fun graphics and sounds and things like that. It's really engaging to look at. I learned Magic on paper first. I downloaded Arena as I was learning just so I could get used to attacking and blocking. And because Arena kind of you can't mess up triggers or rules or anything like that because it does everything for you was kind of a good way for me to get used to the cards that I was playing and just get used to the mechanisms of the game when I had nobody else around to play with. And then once I learned how to play the game, I kind of left Arena alone for a while because I really just used it as kind of like a practice mode or a tutorial for me. And I played EDH in paper consistently for a year. And then when there was a rise of COVID cases again, there was concern that the LGSs might have to close for a week or two. And I was worried that, well, that's how COVID started. Everything shut down for what we believed to be a week or two. And then it ended up being months to a year, of some things being shut down and some things never reopening. So when that growing concern became a reality that I may not be able to play in person, I started familiarizing myself with more online platforms. I had only heard of Discord, but I had no idea what it was. People were like, "Yeah, there's all these communities that you can join in Discord and all these people play Magic online and they use a camera overhead and there's this program called Spell Table and you can play it online 4-player with the overhead camera." And so I just ordered all the stuff that I needed online and I had this like little janky setup and I I Googled a bunch of Magic Discords and I entered a bunch of Discords. I played around on Spell Table. I saw that you could just like you didn't have to set up a pod. You could play with just people online. So I did that for a while and then I started getting back into Arena and I said, well, when there's nobody to play with, or if I just don't feel like having the like social interaction of a 4-player game or a live game, I want to just be able to play this game on my own. So I re-downloaded Arena and I started messing around on there and just kind of naturally fell into standard and just got better at it, started building my own decks there and familiarizing myself with the style of a 1v1 game and the deck building differences in building a standard deck versus an EDH deck. And little by little, I started exploring other formats like Brawl, Historic Brawl, which is more like Commander on Arena, some limited, some sealed. These were things that I felt like I was never really good at in paper. So being able to do that on Arena versus kind of like a faceless stranger that I'll never come across again and can't really interact with was just really good practice for me. And I do feel like an overall stronger player as a result of having explored these options. It's made me a better player in all formats, even though the card number of in the decks is different and even though it's 1v1 versus a 4-player pod like EDH, it made me better at strategy and better at deck building. And I really find so much value in having learned other formats. It's helped me overall as a player. And I do feel like I'm starting to get more confident in potentially exploring competitive Magic someday. I don't think I'm quite there. And I know that there are some people who are competitive players who have been doing this since the 90s. And I would be going up against people who just have this wealth of knowledge and experience that I could never have. But I'm starting to feel more comfortable and confident as a player that I would be willing to explore a competitive space in the future.
Wow, that was a lot.
I know. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm a
that was
talker.
great. That's very good. You even went over a lot of these points as well, which is very cool. I'm really glad you mentioned about Arena being a way to really get into the game and familiarize yourself with the game. And if you're a new player listening to this podcast and you're not really feeling Commander or it doesn't seem like the right thing for you yet, absolutely jump into these free experiences with Arena. And you can even try Brawl if you really want to get into that singleton experience and kind of learn how it works and how it feels and if it's right for you. But you absolutely have an avenue to get into the game. Even though Commander is the most popular format right now, you absolutely do not have to be a Commander player to be a Magic player. All these formats are valid, especially if you're wanting to play competitively and you're not necessarily looking for an unsanctioned format, even though we do have competitive Commander. Then absolutely try to learn these formats free and easy, and don't immediately try to invest into something like Modern or Legacy if you're not familiar with the game yet and you're just wanting to get your basics down. You did mention with Magic Online, and I find it really interesting because a lot of people have this different perspective on it. And my biggest thing with Magic Online is that it's not free necessarily. Like you're gonna have to spend money if you want to play anything probably other than Pauper, because you do get a lot of free cards and you get some free standard cards when you join MTGO. But I find that it's actually, for me, it's where I go to play the most casual Magic. I do play Modern on there as well, just because there's not really an alternative format to do that online, at least. But with Commander, I tend to bring my decks that are kind of a headache to track things. Decks with like a lot of counters and things like that, or odd mechanics, odd stacked situations, because I just want the machine to do it for me. I don't want to keep track of all these crazy things
Right.
happening. So for me, MTGO is kind of just like, this deck is way too complicated to play in paper. You know, with my when I'm playing with my friends, we might be drinking or smoking or doing whatever. We might not be paying attention, so we don't want these really super complicated board states in our casual games. But on Magic Online, you can do all the stupid things, and the only thing you really have to worry about is the client crashing, which is not the end of the world, obviously. But it's really interesting
Oh,
to get your perspective on that.
it's really funny to hear you talk so much about MTGO, given the cost. I think that's another thing I didn't really touch on with regards to Arena is that I've never spent a dollar on Arena. I have used free codes that were included in packs from pre-release kits that I played in paper and things like that. I have also used free codes that are available online. Every time a new set drops, Arena gives you a code to have access to several free packs from those sets. And you have abilities, ways to amass cards just from those free codes alone. And and they also give you like starter decks as well. Once you start playing games, even with the starter decks, you start getting gems and coins for winning those games or for completing daily challenges like killing 20 of your opponent's creatures. It doesn't have to be in one game, it's cumulative. So if you have completed that challenge, then you get prizes for those, and you can then use those prizes that cost you nothing at all but gameplay to purchase other cards that you are missing from your set or from a deck that you want to complete on Arena. While that's a slower process than just slamming your credit card into the interface and buying outright all the cards that you want, which is, I'm sure, what some people do, I already spend so much money on paper Magic that I didn't want to have to invest any more money for digital versions of cards that I already have in paper. It just didn't seem like a wise use of my spending when I'm already allotting quite large percentage of my spending for cards and content. So I kind of pride myself in, while it is a bit of the long route, I pride myself in the fact that I haven't spent any money on Arena. I just play it with what I have, and when I amass coins or gems, then I buy those things that I really, really want. I can see that if I desperately want to build a certain deck and I want to play that immediately, then that might be where I'm like, okay, I'll spend $20 here or a couple bucks here or whatever just to get this done and make it faster. But at the moment, I haven't ever needed to do that. So I like that Arena is essentially a completely free way to play this game, which makes it really, of course, it makes it affordable because it costs nothing, but it makes it accessible to not only people who can't afford to purchase the cards, but also to children and to teenagers, people who are just getting into gaming and maybe want to give it a try. It'll cost parents nothing to let them try this game virtually first. I have only had positive experiences with Arena, and I think the fact that you are able to play it for free is a big draw for me.
Yeah, I think the accessibility of Arena is probably its biggest selling point, and kudos to you for not spending any money on gems because I certainly have. I'm weak. Especially because for me, when I get into a format like standard or rotating formats or even modern, I kind of set my eyes on a deck and I just say I want to play that. So if I have the
So
opportunity, I'll do that.
I have never built a meta deck because it feels like copying to me. I feel no sense of pride in playing a deck that someone else built and having no authenticity to it. So I know that that's the nature of competitive gaming and that that's the way that people play the game, but I don't enjoy the game if I had no hand in building the deck. I do like using what I have and being resourceful and coming up with the most unique idea as possible. And I might like a deck that somebody else has built, but I would tailor it and make it my own, make some changes. I did once, I think I won like a gift card somewhere and it was like a $20 Visa gift card or something. And I just put that into Arena because I had nothing else to spend it on. So I just put it into Arena. So technically I did buy gems with it, but I don't even think I've spent them all. Just, but I haven't spent any money that out of pocket on Arena, which is super awesome and great. But I know that that is a thing. If you are into like competitive Magic or meta decking, then yeah, you are going to have to spend the money to get the exact cards you want if you want them immediately and you want to play that deck today. Then yeah, for sure you could be spending some money on it. But it really depends on the type of gamer that you are and the type of experience that you want to have. And that's another good thing about the online platforms is that you can choose to spend money or not. You can choose to be that type of gamer and say, I want this deck and I want it right now and I'm willing to pay for it. Or you can say, this is a platform that I personally just want to play for free. And there's many ways to do that.
I certainly do wish that the arena format where we're getting codes with every new set and codes in physical product. I do wish that was something that was available for Magic Online. Magic Online does have an effective initial cost of $5 if you want to trade, which is the only way you're able to buy cards effectively. But one advantage that MTGO does have is that you're actually able to buy the cards directly. You don't have to buy wild cards. There's not a dusting system. It's just you buy the cards for market value, which online they make reprint products all the time. So things like dual lands are incredibly affordable. So that's one advantage is that you can actually, if you want to get into these formats like Legacy and Modern, where the cards are kind of hard to get a hold of, you're not going to crack packs for that. You're not going to crack chests, although you can earn them. If you play something like Modern or you do a lot of draft or sealed, then you actually do have the opportunity to earn things in the game. But there is that like initial cost. You have to kind of spend money to play and then you sell the product back. So it's kind of this feedback loop of being able to use your resources. I do wish it was a little bit more like Arena, but I did mention draft and sealed, which I think is probably the one format I think everyone should play. I think no matter what formats you play, I think you probably should go to your LGS, and if you can, if you can afford to, if it's feasible for you, participate in the drafts and the sealed events, pre-releases. Wild 12 Drains pre-releasing this weekend that we're recording on. So if we haven't already, we are probably going to do that.
I agree with you, though My first pre-release that I participated in was New Capenna, and I was really nervous because it just felt like it was a completely different format than I was used to. I didn't really know how to draft or how to pick cards or what I was looking for, and felt really intimidated by it. And I'm a person who doesn't like to do things if I'm going to be bad at them. I want the opportunity. I don't have to be the best. I don't have to win every time, but I would like the opportunity to be decent or not make a fool of myself. And I just didn't know what I was walking into, but I tried it. And it took a while to get the groove of drafting. I still don't think I'm a very good drafter, but I understand it a lot more. And it certainly has changed the way I deck build and the way I strategize a game. And just another element of making you a better player. So sure, it's a different way to play. It's a different format in and of its own entity, but it's also so crucial in understanding how to build cohesively and how to build around what you have on hand and how to build or I guess I don't want to say success because I don't win. I don't often win my drafts, my pre-releases, but I'm so bad. But it is a lot more fun now. I enjoy it and I feel like it has made me a better builder and I like the experience of really getting to know a set. When a new set comes out, doing a pre-release or a sealed event is just such a great way to see how that set interacts with itself rather than just hearing people's opinions on what they think the best cards are and just buying those singles and slotting them into your EDH decks. It's like there's value to seeing how a whole set works together. It was meant to be played with each other, these cards, how these cards interact with each other, how they play against other decks within the same sphere. I feel like I have gotten to know cards that I maybe would have never heard of because people weren't hyping them up online by playing them in pre-releases. And there are cards that I've set aside or put in decks that nobody ever talks about only because I saw their value in a pre-release where I would have never known that if I hadn't played them in that way because that's the world we live in. If they don't talk about it online, then people have no way of finding out about it and until they see it in gameplay. I feel like pre-releasing and drafting and doing sealed events just is so valuable, especially to new players. It makes you just really knowledgeable about the set.
It absolutely. I feel like that was a kind of a roundabout way to agree with my point. I almost don't think you were going to disagree with me initially, but we kind of came around to being like, yeah, drafting and sealed is absolutely worth doing.
Yeah,
Uh,
for sure.
and you also mentioned that these cards were designed this way, and I think it's worth something to understand that these sets are designed to be drafted, to be done sealed, and the experience is unlike anything else. And I think it's one of the best stories you get from Magic come from pre-releases. I think these limited experiences are so much more memorable just because you kind of crafted out of what you had on hand, and you get in these situations where you drew your bomb, or you drew the removal at
Mhm.
the right time, and you kind of things that you kind of planned for and constructed, but you managed to cobble together out of just what's available in the standard set. And I think the sets become a lot more attractive when you play them that way. Things like, if you've played standard for any particular meta or after a certain set came out, like I've only played standard during Ixalan, the original Ixalan block, and most recently Phyrexia All Will Be One. And both of those were so much better experiences because I had drafted initially and I got to play with these cards. And I said, this interaction is sweet. And I want to play with this more. I want to play with this in constructed. So even if you prefer draft, like you might get the bug for standard, or for maybe you find the EDH card you were looking for, but absolutely you're going to appreciate the cards more and want to play with them more if you got them in a sealed environment. And I think it's also really probably one of the more accessible ways to do it, because not only are you going to be able to do that at your LGS on a fairly regular basis and at pre-releases, but you can also draft both on Arena and on MTGO. Of course, on MTGO, you're going to have access to all of the sets, not just the standard ones. But we talked about that cost difference there. So whatever's appropriate for you or whatever you're more interested in, especially if you're a competitive player, like if you're only playing standard, then great, you just played on Arena. That's awesome for you. But if you want to draft and do sealed and do chaos drafts and cube, you can do that in MTGO. So there's really a wealth of resources for you if you want to play other formats. And luckily, a lot of these cards that you get from these drafts, you can also play them in EDH. So there's really no losing by playing these other formats.
I actually meant to say also, there was an article that was posted by the official Wizards page. I'm trying to find it because I shared it on Twitter a couple days ago. Just had it, then it disappeared. But yeah, I found it. On August 21st, Wizards of the Coast official webpage released an article that says, earn MTG Arena XP when you play WPN in-store events in September. So they're doing this promotion for people who primarily play in Arena to kind of get them back into stores. So if you play in-store events, they're giving you a bunch of codes and gems and things to use in Arena. And it's kind of encouraging people back into paper Magic as well. I feel like this is a bit of a lovely marriage, rewarding online players for playing in-person events as well, getting people back into stores and helping game stores generate that income from people playing in events. So I thought that was a super cool thing that they're doing. And if I'm going anyway, and I play both in paper and in store, in person and online. So there's a lot of benefit to me because I'm doing both either way. But it's good encouragement to get people back into stores. So I love that.
Yes, absolutely. Any support that we can get for our LGSs, we absolutely want. Those are the places you play. Those are the places where
Yeah.
you can buy things online, but there's only so many places you can play. And meeting the other people in this wonderful, wonderful game is a lot of the experience, at least for me, the social experience, and also meeting a lot of regular players.
Speaking of social experience, another thing I wanted to touch on that we kind of glossed over a little bit earlier, Commander is such a social game, right? It's so political, and a lot of the times you're wheeling and dealing, or depending on your play group and the style of the group, you tend to make more diplomatic decisions and not do the thing that makes people feel bad. Where 1v1 Magic is the complete opposite. You are trying to beat this one opponent. So the point is to win. The point is to do the bad thing, the thing that's going to destroy their board. And if you have to do that repeatedly, while that normally feels really bad in Commander, that is the name of the game in 1v1. And I find that people who have had more experience in one format than the other experience this weakness when they're exploring the new format. So, as an EDH player, when I got into 1v1, it was hard for me to understand why they were just like relentlessly doing the feel bad thing. It took me a little while to kind of be like, oh, that's just the way it is here. And conversely, there was a game of Commander that I played with somebody who was just constantly targeting me and removing just the dumbest things from my board. And I was like, are you playing anything but removal in your deck? Like, why are you just targeting me? There are two other players. I played an Ornithopter. It was like, there's nothing to remove here. And they just were constant. And I had such a bad experience. And I remember just being so upset at my LGS that day because I was just like, this was the most annoying game. I'm just so emotionally drained. And one of the LGS owners was like, oh, he's getting into Commander from 1v1 format. And at the time, I didn't play 1v1 at all. So I was like, so? And they were like, I was like, I didn't get it. And they were like, well, he's used to just going against one person and just trying to kill that person, you know? So, like, he's just used to targeting. That's the way 1v1 is. There's a lot of targeted removal, there's a lot of interaction, there's a lot of cutthroat, I'm going after you kind of thing. And I was like, "Well, that freaking sucks." And I just like there was nothing about it that I found enjoyable until I actually tried it. And I was surprised to find that I liked it because I didn't like that interaction so much in EDH. And it's not that I don't like the interaction, it's that I was used to the social nature of what EDH was, and that's just not the nature of 1v1. And once I had that realization, I was able to enjoy the different formats.
The mindset shift there is really wild. And I think that's something that might be kind of hard to grasp for players who are only playing one or the other. I think someone who plays like modern or legacy or even just very competitively into standard might go into EDH with that mindset of, oh, I just need to kill this other person. We're not here for fun and games. We're just playing my format, but it's singleton. It's an interesting parallel because you can kind of do that when you're getting into like CDH or even the 1v1 EDH if you're coming in from something like modern, but it's kind of a different deal with the social aspect of multiplayer. And I think that you definitely should experience both. I think that there's a lot of benefits to doing both, but understanding that and getting that mindset change
Mhm.
is going to do a lot for you, I think. I also think that people who play competitive commander would really, really enjoy playing the competitive 60 card formats. And a lot of them do. But I think if you play exclusively CDH, then you would have a hell of a time playing modern or legacy, especially right now where we have a couple of tier zero decks that are really doing a lot and you kind of get to get your rounds in and practice and kind of do the same actions over and over, which is kind of something you're probably used to from playing competitive EDH as well. But I think that is definitely more towards the competitive side of it. I think that if you play Magic in 60 card formats, but you play really casually, like you only play kitchen table, then I think you really enjoy EDH. And if you only play EDH super casually, then I think you might enjoy jumping into the formats that are not so competitively minded. I guess that's hard to discern because like if you play standard, like standard's sort of a competitive format, but you can play more, you can get away with more. You can play more goofy things, you can play popper and play like interesting decks there, but you don't have to necessarily jump into modern if it's not for you. You could absolutely try it, and I do recommend it. And modern players will tell you if you can't afford a deck, proxy it or play it online. Just with the
Mhm.
simulator until you figure out what you like. And I absolutely encourage it. I think everybody should do whatever they can to learn and experience these things before you invest, and just find out what you
Yeah, I
like.
know. I know there are other programs that are less popular. I have a friend who plays on a program called Xmage, and it's completely digital. It looks a lot like MTGO, and I don't think you're playing a real person. I think you're playing against a computer or like, it's kind of like playing computer chess, but with Commander. And you can just upload your deck list and play your deck against computer generated deck just to kind of play test and give yourself the opportunity to see how your deck performs versus an opponent before you actually bring it to a table, and you can better gauge what kind of edits or changes you want to make. And it does play like you're playing against a real person or like you're playing real magic, and it gives you a good opportunity to see how your deck plays. But also some people just use it because they want to jam a game and they don't really want to get together a pod, or maybe it's late or something and they kill time playing online. But it's a bit less talked about, but I do have a couple friends who use Xmage for a myriad of different reasons.
Yeah, when I actually first got into Commander, I kind of had this problem where my play group couldn't get together on a regular basis. We all worked. It was just kind of not super convenient to do so. So I actually did use Xmage early on. If that's what you got to do, absolutely do it. There's other simulators. There's Cockatrice as well for manual. And I believe X Mage you can also play against other players. It's just kind of a different setup. But also feel free to mock up a deck, just put what you can in sleeves and then print the rest. And you could probably find some place on Spell Table. I don't know if Spell Table has a very big community for non EDH games, but you can certainly jump into Discords. You can jump into the Play EDH, or not the Play EDH Discord necessarily, but there's plenty of communities out there for different formats if you want to play. And you can certainly jump into my Discord, and the links, all the things we talked about, the links will be in the description. But you can certainly jump into my Discord if you're trying to jam some games in whatever format, and we'll try to hook you up.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's what we're all about, is playing Magic, and I love every format. I mostly play EDH, but that's what people are playing. You know, if people played Legacy and Modern, right next door, I'd be over there too. I absolutely, even if I didn't, I would still want to go over there, pick up some decks. If you've got some friends that play these formats, then you should probably talk to them and see if they want to get you into the format. Like most people and Magic players are, a lot of them are like this. If you tell them, hey, I want to get into that format you play, they will be so excited and they will
Mhm.
immediately hand you a deck and say, play this. And you'll
Yeah,
you'll
for
learn the
sure.
format really fast. And you can even do this a little bit at your local game store. Not every local game store is like this. I apologize if it's not for you, but at least where I live, people are really, really happy to get you involved, and they're really happy to loan you a deck if you want to try to get into something.
Oh, yeah. People love to show you the thing that they love. So if they're getting more people into it, then I have found that everyone's always willing to add another player to teach somebody about that new thing. Or even if you are familiar with a certain format, there's always different like meta decks or different strategies that people prefer. And getting your friend to play that mid-range deck or whatever, that thing that they love that you never do, I always find that people are really eager to help you get into that thing or talk about the thing that they're really excited about. That's one thing I love about LGSs as well. That's where I went to my LGS for board games, but I had always wanted to learn Magic and just never knew anybody who played and didn't know where to start, didn't know how to get into it. And then I noticed that my LGS had, Magic the Gathering product, and I never really paid much attention to it because I was always there for board games. And one day I just was like, "Hey, I wanna know how to play this. What do I do? Where do I start? Where do I go?" And, they talked to me about just, like, starter decks, and that was just the easiest way to get going because you can just rip it right out of the box and go. So I said, "Cool, that sounds great." It was affordable, 20 or $30 a starter deck. It was just ready to go. And I said, "Well, who do I play with? What can I do?" They said, "Well, we play Commander on Fridays. That's the most popular format. You can buy a pre-constructed deck and just show up. Just come like an hour early on Friday. And there are people here that are already here, just kind of jamming casual games or setting up, and they will be more than happy to teach you." And I was like, in New Jersey, no one is friendly. So like I find this hard to believe that I'm just going to show up and people are going to want to teach me this game and they aren't going to be frustrated that I know nothing. And they were like, "No, really, just show up." I'm like, "Okay." So their game started at 7 and I came around, I don't know, 5:30, 6 o'clock. And sure enough, there were people there that were just like, "Hey, you want to learn how to play this? Cool. Let me show you." And sat with me, played a couple games with me, and the first time I played, they, like, bought me into the paid pod, and I was like, "I don't know what I'm doing," and they're like, "No, it's fine." Everybody just kind of, even though it was a paid pod and everybody paid to be in it, they all agreed to just play, like, precons or really casual decks, and just let me walk through and teach me, and that was really impressive, and it felt really welcoming and good, and it made me want to go back and play more and try new decks and play different colors and explore the game a lot more. And I think if I didn't have that welcoming first experience, I might never have been as into Magic as I am now. And that seems to be consistent with other people's stories, is that when they went to their LGS, they were really welcomed and they were helped. And people who are really passionate about the game are always happy to help out new players and get more people into the game. I'll be the one to say it before anybody else says it. There was a comment made at my LGS that, of course, people would want to help me because I was the only girl there and these men haven't seen a woman in a long time or something like that. So my LGS kind of made jokes and they were like, "You're the unicorn, like no girls come here to play this game. So of course everybody's going to want to help you because everybody wants to help the unicorn." And I was like, "Thank you so much." From that joke came a unicorn deck, and I built a unicorn deck as one of my early on decks because of that. But since then, more women now play at the LGS, so it's not just me anymore.
Yeah, it can be really easy to kind of discredit the people coming in, but if you are one of these enfranchised players, then it is your responsibility a little bit to welcome people into the fold, especially if they are underrepresented. And I know it can be certainly tough for women, especially in areas like mine that are primarily Caucasian. Having people come in that are not white, it can feel a little intimidating. So you really should be a part of that solution and get more people into the game and bring them into the fold. And there's starter decks for multiple formats now, so you
Yeah.
absolutely should be a part of that process. And I know it's awkward too for us guys to want to be the one to help out, because it's like you don't want to be the guy who's trying to impress the unicorn necessarily. But
Yeah, yeah.
so I know it's an
Yeah.
awkward social situation to handle, and us Magic players aren't always the best in social situations. But
Exactly,
just do your
exactly.
best. Just be earnest and share your love of the game with them. It doesn't have to be this parasocial relationship thing. Just share
Right,
your love of the game
exactly.
and hope that that spark hits them too.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I had a really welcoming environment, and it didn't feel for the wrong reasons. It felt like people were just genuinely excited about the game and excited to have a person playing that isn't from their regular group. It's somebody new and somebody that could potentially bring other new players. So it was exciting for them and exciting for me, and I felt very welcome, and it didn't feel like people were hitting on me to play or something. You know what I mean? It felt comfortable. I know that's not everybody's experience, but for me, it felt very comfortable, and I felt welcome for the right reasons. And I try to be mindful when I am playing with new players or when I see a new person come in. I want to create the same welcoming atmosphere that I experienced. And it's important to kind of pay that forward and be patient with new people because you want more people to play with and you want that diversity. You want to see what other people's minds come up with. You don't want stale games with the same players and the same decks and the same type of players all the time. It's really good to have the experience of playing with a bunch of different types of players from all walks of life. And it's always a good thing to welcome new players and to help guide them into the formats that they're interested in.
There are only winners in the situation where we're welcoming and bring people in who might otherwise not get into this wonderful game. I think that's a really good note for us to close out on. I did have one story I wanted to tell briefly
Sure.
about somebody who joined us for draft. There was a new player, he'd just gotten into Magic. I actually met him when I was looking through the bulk bins for singles for commander decks. But this gentleman was very, very quiet. He was just hanging out in the corner of the store, just wasn't super social. But that's fine. It's fine to be, a little awkward your first time in a new environment. But the next time I was there, he had learned a little bit more about Magic, and he actually joined us for a draft. And he didn't know what to do at all. He was completely new, and everybody in our pod was just helping him out, letting him know what to do. We were giving him advice, and he had a great time. And he won some packs, which was great. He won a few games, and I think that winning a couple games of your first Magic experience is really, really great. And the following week, we came back and we played with this gentleman again, and he actually won the draft. And I cannot think of a better experience for a new Magic player, especially one that is either completely new to the game or just new to the format. I think giving people the chance to experience and feel welcomed is such an amazing thing, not just for them, but for us that got to make that experience for them really work out. So I just cannot stress enough that if you are an franchise player, if you are an LGS owner, if you are an LGS staff person, then you are making a world of difference by helping these people experience the game. I just cannot stress enough just how thankful I am for the people that made that experience, for me when I was new and for all these other people that I get to play against on a regular basis.
I agree with everything you said. I think that's all perfectly worded. I couldn't have put it better myself. I think it's important that I think people experience kind of like this self fulfilling prophecy or this kind of like worry, this anxiety that if they go and try this new thing or go to this new place, that they're going to have a bad experience for whatever reason. They're going to experience racism or be left out because of their gender or whatever reason. And I'm sure that's the way of the world. I'm sure that happens sometimes. But I have not personally experienced that in my spaces. And I live just outside of New York City, and it is not the most welcoming or friendly place. People usually keep to themselves and aren't overly friendly. They don't reach out to you to do you favors, for no reason. It feels suspicious when somebody's really nice to you and you don't know them. Coming from this environment normally, I have found all of my magic spaces to be incredibly welcoming and friendly. I've not had a negative experience as a new player in a space. So I can't say enough that I encourage people to set aside the discomfort and just try it because you're doing yourself more of a disservice by not trying it and not being that different voice in the room that needed perspective that wasn't there before. It's all about changing the mindset. What seems like a negative to you in your mind about trying something new and being the only one that looks this way in the room could be the thing that they needed. You could be the most valuable person in the room because of what you bring to the table. So it's just about shifting the mindset and not expecting the worst, but hoping for the best. I am really fortunate to have had that experience.
I'm really glad that you're part of our community and that you can share that perspective with us. And I think that your
Thank
voice
you.
has been a really important part of this conversation. I'm really glad. I hope that people who are hearing this feel like they can maybe venture into some other formats or into new games or just new experiences. And I think there's nobody better I could have brought on to give people that impression. So thank you so much for being here on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate you for everything you do and for allowing me come on and talk about these things.
And we're always happy to have you.